Alright, I've approximately been standing here for about 15 minutes! Ah! It's so hard to choose! Trying to make a selection from so many different eras of gaming with different options. This is so annoying! You know what? I'll just go with something from the 360 era and call it a day.
Which one do I pick?
Question time. What's a good way of knowing a character has been around for a good while in gaming? When they go through at least 2 freaking redesigns. Video game character eras. Something every character has at some point in their long run through gaming with their own respected series. Specifically, whenever it's time for a new generation of consoles, that's usually when a game franchise and that character will usually enter a new era. Some eras were really good, and some are still hard to comprehend this very day. But one thing that's really interesting about seeing a character have different eras in their series is not only what is their worst era in their existence, but what exactly would be classified as their definitive era. An era where that character and franchise really and truly shine. An era where that character's game lineup was like no other, and is still great to this very day. An era where things were figured out for the franchise, and the teams knew what style, personality, and gameplay worked for their beloved characters, and thus this would end up creating great experiences for these franchises. These things right here are what you would be able to classify as a character's definitive era. An example of characters having their definitive eras would be Crash Bandicoot in the 90s on the original Sony PlayStation from Naughty Dog. My goodness, that was a mouthful. These games are what made Crash Bandicoot one of the most iconic characters from PlayStation back in the 90s. The fun gameplay and simple story from these games really is what made Crash so well loved back then, to even now with the new lineup of games we've gotten. Not to mention Crash's sort of fun, goofy character that brings a level of charm to his character. That's what made him so iconic. These games are still massively loved to this very day with the original lineup of games from Naughty Dog of Crash Bandicoot, with the amount of good games that was released from them. Naughty Dog really knocked it out of the park, starting off one of gaming's most memorable franchises.
See, I can say good things about Naughty Dog!
Another good examples of characters in their definitive era is the Donkey Kong Country series on the SNES. Many people can agree this is where the character Donkey Kong absolutely peaked. Gone are the days where he's just an ape climbing up construction units with some dude's girl and throwing barrels at Italians. Now the Donkey Kong character has its own franchise separate from Mario, and has its own cast of characters, fun levels, great platforming, and tons of fun with memorable levels and music. Donkey Kong would still be associated with Mario in future games, but the Donkey Kong Country games are still loved by many people, and many consider this the definitive era of Donkey Kong. And it shows because the Donkey Kong Country games from Rare and Nintendo are fantastic games that still hold up well to this very day. And that's just 2 examples of characters in their definitive eras. There are many more characters that have their own definitive eras that I could go on about, but we'd be here all day if I was to do that. But today I want to gather 3 characters I've personally selected that have multiple varying eras throughout their history. These 3 characters I picked today have multiple eras, some good and some bad. And I want to go through and tell what I personally think is these 3 characters' definitive eras in their game history. So to start us off, let's start lightly with one I think we can all actually agree on. Whenever you hear someone talk about Mega Man, what's one of the first few games you think of from that series? Some will say the iconic Mega Man X series on the SNES and the PlayStation. Very few will say Mega Man Legends, who in their right mind is actually playing that. And then there's the 1% that say Mega Man on DOS. You had no idea this existed till you saw this video in 2014. But the one thing that everybody points to with this franchise is the one and only, the true definitive era of Mega Man, that being the lineup of games on the NES.
That's so predictable, aren't I? What?
While there have been great Mega Man games after the NES, nothing will truly beat the original lineup of the 6 classic 8-bit games on the NES. These games are packed with so much variety and content. The jumping, the shooting, the music, the levels, the power-ups, the music, the awesome level design, the varying patterns to go after the bosses from the menu to the music! The original lineup of Mega Man games on the NES were always such a blast. The gameplay from these games are so dang good at what they are, especially for these being just simple 8-bit games at first. Once you get more of the robot power-ups, the gameplay gets more varied and strategic with more fun to be had. And of course, when going through these fun and also challenging levels, you're probably listening to the best tunes of the 8-bit era of video games. Seriously, listen to some of these. My My lord, Capcom really knew what they were doing when they was making this soundtrack. I remember when I first started playing these games when I was 14. I found out there was a game collection available on the Switch, and then my stepmother accidentally bought the X collection for my birthday. But then eventually I managed to find the actual Mega Man Legacy collection for the Nintendo Switch, and when playing this, I remember having such a fun time with these classic games. It doesn't get better than these. So many fun times were had back in 2018 with this collection. Half of the hype cycle for Smash Bros. Ultimate, I would always be playing the Mega Man Legacy collection on the Nintendo Switch. What's so good about these games is yet again just the simplicity of it. A little story plot at the beginning, title screen, pick your opponent, bam, right into the gameplay. Now as time went on and the Mega Man games got onto more consoles, eventually things like more story with text boxes came into play, much like other games from the time, and even cutscenes too later on, and voice acting?
Hey, Bass! Why must I fight you? We are not enemies!
Looking past those, the Mega Man games on the NES are some of Capcom's greatest work out there. Capcom has made many great and wonderful franchises. They have so many, from Resident Evil to Street Fighter, Devil May Cry, Ace Attorney, Monster Hunter, Marvel vs. Capcom, Dead Rising. Out of all of them, in my opinion, Mega Man is Capcom's tried and true franchise. And the definitive era from Capcom Super Fighting Robot has gotta be the NES era of Mega Man. Everyone really enjoys these games, and they're always a fun time. Sure, they have their own tedious moments. The platforms come to mind for this one. But looking past that, the Mega Man lineup of games on the NES are amazing, and what I and probably many others would classify as Mega Man's definitive era in the history of the Mega Man series. Now, moving on to the next one, this is going to be a character that has had the most eras out of all the characters I've mentioned so far. Alright, so let me ask you this. Whenever you hear the word Nintendo, what is the first thing that comes to mind? That's not even the right company, man. Out of all the many franchises Nintendo has, Mario is by far the most popular out of them all. But you already knew this, you don't need me to tell you this. Everybody knows Mario. Just simply looking at the Nintendo logo, 9 times out of 10, people normally think of Mario. I mean, heck, whenever you start playing that old classic tune from when you start up the very first game back from 85, everyone knows exactly what that is. It'll have your mom, uncle, and aunt really start rekindling the old days. Now with that said, with all the many eras the Mario franchise has had since the 80s, which one would I classify as Mario's definitive era? Well, in my own opinion, the era that I think would be Mario's definitive era is not the SNES, not the N64, nor the Nintendo Switch. But I believe that Mario's definitive era is in fact dated back to the days of the Nintendo Wii. The Wii era of Mario was like no other. This era to this day is still loved and talked about like it was Mario's last ever appearance. While of course that's not entirely true, Mario still did good in the Wii U era and of course is putting out good stuff on the Switch. But when it comes to an iconic era of Mario, the Wii era is truly unforgettable. Oh man, so many good games from this era. We got games like Super Paper Mario, Mario Party 8, New Super Mario Bros. Wii, Mario Kart Wii, Mario Strikers Charge, Mario Super Sluggers, Mario Sports Mix. We got Mario and Super Smash Bros. Brawl, one of the best Smash games of the entire series. Also, there was the start of the Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games series here as well. Not to mention the Wii port of the GameCube game Mario Power Tennis, as well as the Mario All-Stars Wii port too. And of course, how could we forget the one and only greatest game series to come from the Wii era, and that is the Super Mario Galaxy series. Oh, and there was another Mario Party game here too, or whatever, I don't know. These games from this era of Mario are forever iconic. There might have just been one little slip up, but a good chunk of the games here are so dang good. From the fun amounts of racing in Mario Kart Wii, the beautiful gaming masterpiece that is the Mario Galaxy games, the nostalgic trip that is New Super Mario Bros., and of course the fun sports games that were here too. The amount of Denim in Super Smash Bros. Brawl! While it wasn't a lot of games on the Wii, they were all still a ton of fun and brought a lot of fun to the table. Not to mention that not only were these games playable on the Wii, but thanks to the Wii's backwards compatibility with the GameCube, with this feature here, we have the Wii library of Mario games and the gems from the GameCube era of Mario as well. So, now we got 2 whole eras to play on this one console right here. How could we also forget the music from this era as well? Oh my goodness, are these so good! Mario Galaxy's beautiful, powerful orchestra masterpiece of a soundtrack, and Mario Kart Wii and New Super Mario Bros. Classic tunes of gaming coming straight from Nintendo's beyond talented music team. These OSTs from this era are truly something else, and give off a vibe that one can only describe as, well, Nintendo. Music from this era is so freaking good, it got its own unofficial genre. Each game that came from this era of Mario, each felt like so much love and passion were put into each one. Now, that's not to say that any of the recent ones don't have any at all, but there's something about the Wii era of Mario games that feel different to me. Now, of course, is there some form of bias with nostalgia here? Yes, of course there's some. But at the same time, not entirely though. There's something about this era of Mario that really just feels timeless. There's nothing else like these games, honestly. And I feel like Nintendo did a great job at making truly a timeless era of games from not just Mario, but the Wii era as a whole is so timeless. While yes, Nintendo has made many other great games afterwards, there truly is nothing else like the Wii. And of course, the Mario games from this era are forever iconic, and these games here from the Wii are what I think is truly Mario's definitive era. And also just go ahead and throw the DS in there too, why not? Now, the last two characters that we went over today, their eras went on for many years in their own definitive era. But this next one is probably going to end up being the shortest out of them all, but it sure had one heck of an era for being pretty short-lived. Whenever you think of a franchise with many varying eras, some good, some bad, what are some franchises that come to mind first? Oh, so I guess he's the only one that's gone through this. Sonic the Hedgehog, one of the most well-known game characters out of all of gaming. Much like Mario, just about everyone knows who Sonic is. This blue creature is iconic, but while Sonic may be well known by many, that's not entirely all for good reasons. Around the early to mid 2000s, Sega and Sonic Team kept on screwing up the Sonic games coming out at the time. Top that off with what's now considered one of the worst video games in history, and review bomb after review bomb, to leading to a new decade of mediocrity and a laughingstock of a franchise, to then finally now getting back on track a decade later. Yeah, this franchise has been through a lot, and it's been a pain being a fan the past 10 years. So with that said, you're probably thinking right now, well Con, if Sonic had such a massive downfall in the 2000s and onward, and is just now getting back up on his feet, where was his definitive era at? Surely it hasn't been recent, right? Well, to answer your question, it was not always all bad for Sonic. Believe it or not, there was once a time Sonic was the coolest thing out there on the planet. Sonic was the video game character. Him and Mario were the biggest video game rivals to ever meet gaming. Heck, still is one of the best rivalries to this very day. So with that in mind, what was this definitive era then? Well, I think we could all likely know what it was. Nope, a little further. There we go. Okay, please hear me out on this. While many claim the Genesis era is Sonic's tried and true good days, it's not really all it means to be. Yes, these classic games made Sonic who he is today with the amazing levels, bosses, great music, and of course emphasis on speed-based platforming, but what I believe is where Sonic's true definitive era is indeed at, it is in the Dreamcast era, being 1999 to 2004. This is where I believe the Sonic franchise truly had absolutely reached its peak in its run. The series was already loved with its 2D games on the Genesis, but when it was time for the jump to 3D, oh man, stuff got real here. After 3D Blast and all that. The Dreamcast is where Sonic's first proper 3D adventure game was home to, that game being Sonic Adventure, and this was the start to what I classify as Sonic's definitive era. While the amount from this era isn't much here, there was some good stuff in this era for Sonic. For starters, there were the Sonic Adventure games on the Dreamcast, the games that truly gave Sonic an amazing gameplay in 3D with amazing levels and music. Come on, it's Sonic. We all know about the music from this franchise. Come on, do we really got to go over that? As well as fantastic stories with them, and introduced many great new characters. Not only that was released on the Dreamcast, but also the first and last Sonic Party game. Also, the first ever Sonic non-Sega portable being Sonic Pocket Adventure for the Neo Geo Pocket Color was released, and it is also in fact the only Sonic game that IGN ever gave a 10 out of 10 to.
Well, if IGN said it, then it's gotta be true.
Not to mention when the Dreamcast died and Sega got out of the console making business, Sonic came to the Nintendo GameCube, and with that were ports of the Sonic Adventure games, a collection of all the Sonic Genesis games into one legendary package, to then the start of the iconic Sonic Portable series on the Game Boy Advance with the Sonic Advance trilogy, with another game being Sonic Battle, and then the drawing conclusion to this era being Sonic Heroes that butchered it all up, to then leading toward the downfall in the later 2000s. See what I mean when I said this era was short? While this era was pretty short run for Sonic, so much good came from it. The Sonic series here was finally at an even better spot than it was ever at before. Sonic had a voice, a style, and a personality brought even more to life than just being in a 2D pixel environment. The character has come to life now in a new way. Sega and Sonic Team had something figured out here. Whenever you play a Sonic game from this era, or see Sonic from this era, or hear a Sonic track from this era, you know it just feels right. This feels like, well, Sonic. The style and personality just, well, feels like Sonic. And you're talking to a fan who leans more toward the stuff from the 2000s, and one who grew up in the 2010s. That's how much this era really shines. The games were consistent, they're still loved to this very day, and overall, really was making Sonic better than ever before. It's just rather unfortunate that after Sonic Adventure 2, when Sonic Heroes released, Sega and Sonic Team's decision making led to a downfall for Sonic from his new era he was in. While unfortunately this era was pretty short-lived for Sonic, however, with where we are currently at in the franchise now, with games like Sonic Frontiers and now upcoming games like Shadow Generations, and how this new game is doing everything right, perhaps now we can say that this new era of Sonic we're entering maybe just might end up becoming Sonic's brand new definitive era. But until then, we can still look back upon this era of Sonic and know that this was where Sonic was truly shining in his adventure era. Each franchise's character always has some kind of definitive era in their history of being around as a character we all know and love. Whether it's one that goes on for a decade or one that goes on for just a few short amount of years, character definitive eras can come in all different shapes and sizes. After seeing the many varying eras, it really makes you think that how well some companies do at managing to keep the momentum going with their franchises. But then being able to sometimes hold on to what we classify as their character's definitive era for so long, it's really impressive. And I thank the many devs and teams that work incredibly hard to try and make any franchise they love and care about to try and shine each time with every entry in their game series. While we all don't have to agree on what we think is a character's definitive era, it's still fun to try and see what we think is a definitive era for that character and franchise.
So now the question is this: does defining a character's definitive era mean anything to the franchise, or does it have an effect on the franchise at all whatsoever? Well, no, not really.
If anything, it just has us, the player, just find a way to show how we feel towards that franchise and the kind of attachment we have with it. Now, let's ask another question. What would I consider to be the definitive era of Kingdom Hearts?
Yeah, I'm not even gonna bother going down that rabbit hole.